When seeking out subject matter to draw, the animal kingdom is always a good place to start. And the more you dive into the animal kingdom, the more you start to find these really interesting, strange, and unique looking creatures. And as you explore through a variety of different species, perhaps one of the most unique type of species is that of the lizard kingdom, more specifically the chameleon. The chameleon is such an interesting animal due to its very strange exterior, and this particular species of lizard comes in so many different types of forms, shapes, sizes, and colors, making it a really fun type of species to explore visually, making it a great subject matter for drawing. With that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore various art related topics, and in today's video we will be looking at how to draw the chameleon. More specifically, we'll be looking at how to draw a green veiled chameleon. So with that being said, let's get into it. Now, the way in which we start this process is by first sketching the chameleon. So we will begin by creating a light sketch of the chameleon using our HB pencils. So we just want to basically start establishing the basic shape of the head, the body, and the legs of our chameleon. Now, the body of the chameleon generally has an arc in the back, and the legs will be joined near the bottom of that chameleon's body. So we do want to obviously make sure we have that slight arcing action in the back of our chameleon, which is very unique to the veiled chameleon. The legs also move in a lateral direction, so this means that they kind of move out sideways from the body. Now, with the tail of the chameleon, it is generally about the length of the chameleon's body and often is coiled up. So we want to also contextualize the chameleon's body, which means we want to draw a branch on which the chameleon is placed. And this way we don't necessarily draw our chameleon kind of just floating in a void. Now, the eyes of the chameleon are really iconic for this specific type of species, and they are kind of like these segmented circles. They get smaller and smaller, almost like the mechanics of a telescope. So basically the chameleon's eye is similar to that of a telescope as it extends with each segment, except it is slightly more dome shaped rather than cone shaped. So that's something we want to just bear in mind as we form the eye. The nose of the chameleon is also generally quite a small opening that is placed just beneath the eye, and then beneath the nose the mouth can be drawn almost as this horizontal line, but almost creating a dismayed expression on the chameleon's face. So with the veiled chameleon, they tend to have this very iconic sad face, which is another quirky iconic expression on the face of the chameleon, as the mouth kind of has this downturned quality. Now, as we kind of continue, we also want both the front and the hind legs of the chameleon to move towards each other, almost as if they nearly touch one another. So we do want to think about their legs and arms almost as human arms and legs, with two main sections. So we do want to create that joint within the chameleon. Another good suggestion is to also look at some reference images of a veiled chameleon. In this case, we are drawing the chameleon from the side angle, or from a side angle. So we do want to bear in mind that some features will be more visible than others. But otherwise, as we continue, the chameleons also have these claw digits on their front and hind limbs, which enable them to grab onto objects. So naturally this will wrap around the branch, and we want to basically draw these digits almost like little mittens, with the front 3 digits visibly grabbing the branch. We can also draw a row of little horns along the spine of the chameleon and their bottom stomach areas. Once again, this is also a really essential characteristic of the very unique veiled chameleon, and this is also just unique to the aesthetic. So we do want to make sure we represent these more subtle features as well. Now, once again, we do want to make sure to draw in a branch that the chameleon can kind of be placed on, as this gives a little more context to the body position of the chameleon and ultimately helps us to establish how it claws or walks along a surface area. We want to make sure that the chameleon also fits along the shape of the branch, especially with the hand, and this just helps us to also understand how to give curvature to its little digits as it kind of wraps around the branch. But otherwise, take your time with sketching and tweaking your chameleon drawing. The intention in this early stage is to keep our sketch quite light, making sure that you have an adequately proportional creature, making sure all the different features are placed correctly, but otherwise just make sure you take your time before we move on to adding in some foundational colors or base colors with our light green pencils. Now again, in this particular tutorial we are working with some colored pencils. However, you can kind of apply this process of building up your tonal values with color with various mediums, even if you are working with a digital device. But the intention now is to basically use a light green pencil to start working in some light pencil shading. Now, slowly giving the chameleon some foundational color to work over is the intention with this early light base layer of color. Again, we build up our color layers from lighter tonal values to darker tonal values. So again, the intention is to basically establish some shading with our light green pencil, and ultimately we'll darken these colors as we proceed. Now we do want to make sure that you also use a reference on the internet to assist you in this coloring phase. Again, looking at the veiled chameleon on the internet is just going to give you a better sense of the actual tonal values that we are working with. The intention should be to add in some light green once again, and then we can just kind of work our way through the entire chameleon, making sure that we are basically shading in the structure of the chameleon with our light green pencil. Now what is meant by that is we also want to just basically work from the head to the tail. So we do want to go through the entire chameleon from one side to the other, and then going through each aspect of the body, slowly working in some light green shading to emphasize the three-dimensionality of the chameleon's body. Now what we will do now is kind of shift into working with some mid-tone shadows with our dark green pencil, or kind of a mid-tone green pencil, and the intention once again is to kind of build up the three-dimensionality by defining the shadow formations on our chameleon drawing. Now once we have established some basic light green coloration within the chameleon, we want to start slowly working in some shadows. So we do this by working from the head to the tail, once again with the intention of shading to emphasize form. When adding in darker green pencil shading, another thing to think about is we want to consider the body of the chameleon and its various features. So this means we want to consider all the indentations, protrusions beneath and on the surface of the skin that would cast shadows. So with the chameleon, especially the veiled chameleon, we'll find that we can see its ribs slightly protrude, and this is because the skin of the veiled chameleon is actually quite thin, so it kind of rests against its skeleton quite closely, and we can actually see all these bone structures kind of protrude from the actual body of the chameleon. But we also want to think about these smaller details of overlapping skin wherever there are joints. This is also just a common feature with lizards, where the skin can kind of fold in on itself or create these little ripples and wrinkles near areas where there are joints that move around in various directions. So we do want to make sure we take our time with the shading of the details, especially within the face areas. So we do want to make sure that we are taking our time working from one side of our chameleon to the other, and that's where we can also start to consider the very finer details within these more delicate areas of the face, such as around the eyes with the various segments, and also again all those little wrinkles that are visible within various areas of the chameleon's body. We also want to consider the rib cage area, especially, that can slightly protrude again from beneath the skin of the chameleon. This will create very subtle shadowing along the body of the chameleon, which will produce slightly darkened ridges within the body. So another thing to think about is how certain areas of the chameleon will have these more stark and darker shadows, whereas other areas kind of have these more subtle protrusions, but therefore will still develop these shadow formations, but they'll be a little bit more subtle naturally. And the rib cage is especially an important area to really represent that more subtle shadow formation. Now once we have done this and we've worked in basically some lighter green shading and some mid-tone green shading, we can kind of move on to darkening the shadows with a darker pencil. Now again, the intention with drawing something realistic is to not only just establish the sketch and then define and refine its form, but then to build up these tonal values from light to dark, and this way you have a lot of agency over your mark making process. Now once we have established the general areas in which the shadows appear, we want to start emphasizing the contrast a little more with some darker green pencils. Now the intention is to build up layer upon layer once again within our shadows, and this way we have more control of how dark they should be. Now again, as we kind of continue, we want to consider the areas of the chameleon's body where shadowing will be greatest, and this means that we want to add shadows to the areas that are least exposed to light, as well as along the creases, the indentations, and any sort of protruding feature. Again, something we really need to understand is that the way in which we represent three-dimensionality in a realistic way in a drawing is basically by defining the shadows, and the way in which we define shadows in a drawing is through the process of shading. However, when we deal with something with color, we don't just shade with maybe like a graphite pencil or a black type of medium, but we want to think about the color values and how they shift from darker tonal values of that color to lighter tonal values of that color. In this case, we are working with variations of green, so that is something you do want to think about in terms of defining a more realistic shadow representation within a colored subject matter. It's also important to have a general idea also of which direction the light source would be coming from, and this means that we want to have shadowing forming predominantly along one side throughout the body for a more realistic shadow effect on our subject matter. Now take your time building up these darker green layers, once again going through each area of the chameleon's body one at a time. And if you get tired, remember to take a break. The idea with drawing something or representing something in a drawing format as realistic as possible is to make sure we take our time, and that can be a little bit mentally straining. So we do want to make sure we take a break throughout our drawing process. Now, once you have completed building up these color values with your green pencils, colored pencils that is, we're going to move on to adding in some pen details for more structure and contrast. Now in this particular tutorial we are working with some ballpoint pen in tandem with colored pencils and graphite pencils, and that is just because ballpoint pen works really well in tandem with these drawing mediums, and it's a great way to emphasize shadows and structure once we have established those base layers of sketching the actual subject matter and then coloration within our subject matter. Now at this point we should basically have a fairly decent drawing of a chameleon, but now we want to just work with some pen details to enhance the different features. Starting with the face, once again we're going to slowly work our way through the entire chameleon drawing, and this is where we basically start to add in some black pen details to emphasize the features. Now it is best to work from the head to the tail, slowly going through each feature one at a time once again, and we want to use our green and black micron pens to add outlines or little sketching marks in the shadows. Now working with some green pens is also just another way to strategically emphasize darker detailing but still maintaining those green features. So consider using something like green markers or green microns. That's a really good material or medium to work with if you are doing a traditional drawing and you're working with colored pencils and pens. However, as you focus on the face, remember that the face does have these more delicate details, especially around the eye. You don't want to make a mistake. So this is why we really just want to take our time going through each feature one at a time, working from the head all the way through to the tail. Now the intention should be to use the pen marks very strategically, as we want to enhance the already drawn features but not distract from them. So we're not necessarily going over them and kind of bombarding our drawing with some pen marks, but we are kind of using our pen marks to kind of enhance the colorations we have already established with our colored pencils. Now another thing to think about is to consider the scaly bone-like structures within the face and how little line work of the pen can enhance these features. Again, thinking about the textural qualities and how to emphasize them with some pen detailing whilst thinking about how to enhance the shadow formation is something you kind of want to keep in mind throughout this pen drawing and pen shading process. So basically we can use our micron pens here more strategically, especially for the spiked ridges that form along the body of the chameleon. We can also use some softer ballpoint pen to go over shadows, incorporating some pen shading into the shadowed areas, and this is a great way to kind of emphasize darker shadowed moments within the chameleon. Ballpoint pen is really good for kind of creating almost smooth shading marks with a pen, so ballpoint pen works really similar to that of a pencil for that kind of effect within your shading process. Another thing we want to think about is also to make sure you come back to the face once you've worked through the body. Again, kind of work through the entire body, spending time on the face, but you do want to make sure that we are refining all the little scales and details within the face, around the mouth, around the eyes, and really emphasizing the details in the eye as well is a really important feature. But otherwise, as you continue, once again, using ballpoint pen is also really good for those softer shading moments where you want to define those softer shadow formations, and something like the rib cage area that has a subtle protrusion from beneath the surface of the skin is a really good feature as an example of how you can use your ballpoint pen to kind of create that seamless shading transition between shadowed areas and lighter areas. Otherwise, continue with this process, working your way through the entire chameleon, and taking your time is really essential. But remember, we are building up our tonal values. It does take time. We want to be patient, and we want to make sure we are taking breaks so we don't necessarily get too tired and accidentally make silly mistakes. unnecessary silly mistakes with your pen drawing process. But otherwise, we should start to see our chameleon coming into a more realistic territory where we've established a more realistic sketch, really worked out the shape and the form. We've worked in some color values, base color, built them up through some darker tonal values with other colors, and then ultimately enhance them with some really dark pen shading, pen detailing, and that's where we really want to take our time enhancing the details of our chameleon drawing. But from there, we're going to basically work on contextualizing features, and this is where we put our attention into kind of emphasizing the detailing within the branch that the chameleon is placed on. Again, the same concepts of building up these tonal values can be applied to the contextualizing features as well. So for the branch, if you think about what kind of color values you want in it, you can kind of build it up from lighter browns to darker browns and ultimately enhancing it with some darker pen detailing. But then you also want to think about the less visible features of the chameleon that are kind of placed on the blind side or the less visible side of our chameleon drawing, so we can kind of see how those little feet kind of wrap around the bottom of the branch. But again, make sure you also look at reference images. It's really important to kind of get a visual assistance in drawing something realistic, or if you're trying to draw something realistic, and this just helps you to understand form, structure, proportions, color values, and ultimately how to integrate shading in a way that seems realistic as it's consistently to one side. But otherwise, spend some time once again on these contextualizing details, especially the branch. Again, when you think about a branch, you do think about how it is quite abstract visually, so you can kind of work with these more scattered pen-like motions and pencil-like motions, where you basically work in these zigzag kind of line formations throughout this horizontal structure, and then you can build up those tonal values once again by darkening them with some darker colors and ultimately enhancing those features with some pen detailing. But otherwise, guys, this is the general process of how to draw a realistic chameleon. Some key concepts to think about. Remember, you want to basically establish the general size and proportions of your chameleon. You can then refine your sketch with your eraser and your pencil. Once you have done that, you can start to build up the color values, working from lighter color values and ultimately refining that with some darker color values. And then lastly, you can really enhance your drawing by integrating a darker medium to represent more contrast, vividness, and define the shadow formations and structures of the various features more distinctly. And that's where you can consider working with something like pens, micron pens, markers. It's really up to you, even darker pencils. If you are working with a traditional medium, that is, and trying to create a more traditional drawing. But the concepts and the ideas of building up your tonal values applies to all mediums, even if you are looking at drawing a chameleon in a digital format. But otherwise, guys, that is it from me today. If you did like this video and are interested in similar or related topics, please let us know in the comment section below. And if you are interested in content like this, please do like this video and subscribe. That helps us to grow the channel, which ultimately enables us to make more art related content for you guys. But otherwise, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from me today. Until next time, cheers.